A Peanuts comic strip shows Charlie Brown and Linus leaning up against a wall, both of them looking rather sad. Linus turns to Charlie and said, "Sometimes I feel like life has passed me by. Do you ever feel that way, Charlie Brown?" Charlie Brown answers by saying, "No, I feel like life has knocked me down and walked all over me." At times, I'm sure that's the way the Apostle Paul must have felt as well. You remember, Paul was the one who God had called to be a missionary, the one who was to take the good news to people in different lands, people who had never heard of Jesus. But as he did that, life wasn't exactly easy. Paul experienced many challenges along the way. He endured one hardship after another. The Bible tells us that as Paul went on his missionary journeys, he was often beaten and harassed. 3 times he was shipwrecked. He was stoned. And on several occasions, he was thrown in jail because of his faith. To top it all off, we're also told that Paul did all this while enduring some ongoing ailment or affliction that he referred to simply as a thorn in his flesh. So if anyone had the right to call it quits, to throw in the towel, it had to be the Apostle Paul. But he didn't. He didn't. Instead, we find Paul encouraging the Corinthians to not give up. He tells them and us to not lose heart because God will never let us be tested beyond our strength. And because God will also provide the way out so that we may be able to endure whatever testing comes our way. Then, to support his claim, Paul reminds them all what had happened to the Israelites during the time of the Exodus. They went from one crisis to the next. But when they were trapped against the sea with the Egyptian chariots bearing down upon them, what happened? God delivered them by parting the Red Sea. And when the people became thirsty and all the water was gone as they made their way through the wilderness, God delivered them once again by providing water from a rock. No matter what kind of crisis the people faced, God was there for them. And so it is for us, says Paul. You know, as I look around this room, I realize that many of you know firsthand what Paul is talking about. And some of you, like Charlie Brown, feel as if life has knocked you down and walked all over you. Many of you have had more than your fair share of difficulties on your journey. Some of you are well acquainted with what it means to suffer. There have been times, I'm sure, when you wondered just how much more you could take. Times when you found yourself asking, why God? Why me? And even if you haven't had such an experience yet, chances are good, reality says, that you will. But reality is that bad things do happen to good people all the time, and life is full of challenges. Challenges even for people like us, people of faith. You know, being a Christian is no guarantee that you will be exempt from hardships in this life. Being Christian doesn't shield us from the difficulties we find on our journey. Having said that, though, I do believe that our faith helps us face those hardships in ways that we could not muster on our own. While God may not keep bad things from happening to us, the thing that we can be sure of is that God is with us in those hard times. And yes, God provides us the resources needed to make it through no matter what. A lot of life depends on the choices we make and whether we allow God to support us as we find our way through difficult situations. One thing is sure, attitude matters. Does it not? You know, we can cling tightly to our self-pity, or we can reach out and grasp the support that God sends our way. We can curl in on ourselves, or we can reach out and ask for help. We can focus on all that we don't have. We can focus on all that we missed. And for sure we will miss all that we have, all the blessings with which God has blessed us. Theologian George Buttrick once observed that the same sun that hardens the clay melts the wax. You may be wondering why that's important. But think about that. An identical source, the sun, produces opposite effects. And the answer lies in the reaction. The reaction is just as important as the initial action when you look at an equation of events. In trying to understand any process, it's not enough to look solely at what sets the whole thing in motion. We humans are different from the rest of creation in that we have been given the gift of freedom. After all, the clay and the wax have no choice in terms of how they react to the sun. But that's not true for us, is it? We can determine what answer we will make to whatever life brings our way, to whatever happens to us. Now, we humans are not free to determine what will happen to us circumstantially in life, but we are always free to determine how we will respond to these circumstances. And folks, such freedom is by no means inconsequential. In a real sense, what we do to life is just as important as what life does to us. And it is this answering dimension of existence, this gift of freedom we have to choose how we respond, that I think Paul is referring to in this morning's scripture. We can choose to allow circumstances to melt us and reshape us in new ways, like wax. Or we can let them harden our hearts and make us stony and inflexible, like the clay. There's a way of responding to situations in life that can make us better, but there's also ways to respond that simply make us bitter. We all have met people who respond in this more heroic way, have we not? People who simply refuse to be overcome by the things that life sends their way, by the things that happen to them. And if you think about those people in your life that you know fit into that category, in each case, I suspect they tend to be persons of flexibility and ingenuity, and perhaps most importantly, they are people of hope. They know how to respond to a shipwreck of dreams. And what I'm saying there is instead of going down in despair or simply blowing up in outrage, they resolutely begin to sift through the debris to see if there are new things that they can make out of the broken pieces of life. By choosing to respond creatively to adversity, the Apostle Paul took his place in that heroic tradition that stretches all the way back through biblical history. Through Abraham and Joseph and Moses and David, who all reacted in positive ways to hardship that came their way. And it's important for us to remember that even Jesus was no stranger to hardship and disappointment. Again and again, what he hoped for and worked to achieve in this world was shattered in failure, but he never allowed those experiences to embitter him or to drive him to a state of despair. Jesus was wax rather than clay. And the question becomes for us, what's the secret of this resilience that enables people to pick up the pieces and start anew rather than going to pieces when they're faced with a tragedy in life? I don't know all the answer, but I think I know something that's key, and that is faith. Each of the people we mentioned, and the people undoubtedly you've mentioned in your own minds, are people who believe that God is faithful, that God can be trusted, that God will not allow the challenges of life to overwhelm. We may not understand why things happen, but our faith teaches us that the why isn't as important as the what. What will we do with what happens in life? Suffering requires not an explanation, but an action and a response. It can be an opportunity to learn. It can be an opportunity to grow. And yes, it can be an opportunity to be transformed. When life turns up the heat, God can use that opportunity to remold us, to reshape us back into the persons we were originally created to be. God can do that, and God does, if we allow God the opportunity to work with us and in us, to take whatever life brings and make us new creatures. We'll talk more about that next week. I do think, however, that it's important to remind you, suffering, tragedy, bad things that happen in life are not God's punishment on us. God does not cause bad things to happen. God doesn't punish us, and God doesn't make us suffer arbitrarily. But what God does do is this: God embraces the suffering we face. God endures the suffering with us. God confronts the suffering. And then if we allow it, God transforms the suffering into the creativity of new life. And that is the good news of the gospel of Jesus the Christ, is it not? So the question is not so much why. Why do bad things happen to good people? The question becomes for us as people of faith, how? How do we live? And how do we endure in a world where bad stuff simply happens all the time? Our response, what we choose to do with that, is an important part of this equation we call life. Because the same sun that hardens the clay melts the wax. The good news is we get to choose. And the question is, which will it be for you? Thanks be to God. Amen.